He wanted something that would delight his daughters and mortify his wife. And knowing my sister, I think what we've got is going to fit the bill nicely. Hi everyone, my name is Katrina Walzer from Oliphant and I'm a knitting teacher, tech editor and designer based in Sydney, Australia. And welcome back to my channel. So this is episode 32 of my monthly knitting podcast on the needles, and it's the first time I've done a sit down and chat to camera video for a while. I've been doing some vlog style videos for the last few months and I really quite enjoy those, but the projects I've been working on this month haven't really lent themselves to vlogging very well, so we're just going to sit and chat. So grab your coffee and your knitting or whatever other drink of choice that you want to take and we'll just get started. So to begin with, what I'm wearing is called Lydia 2.0. It is a pretty old knit by this point. I think I made it. It was definitely pre-pandemic, so maybe in late 2018, early 2019. And it's a pattern by Ivy and Autumn, and the yarn is Pearl Soho Cotton Pure, which is a 4-ply cotton. And it's just this really cute tank top that has a lace detail at the bottom. And I actually made this quite long, so in the pattern it's very cropped, so I just extended it down because I wanted it to have a bit more length. And it's got a nice back that's quite open, but I don't know how to show it well to you, so if I can I'll insert a picture of it here instead. So the first section of my podcast is always on the needles, where I talk about my whips and FOs, and spoiler alert, there are no FOs this month. Just a couple of whips, and only one main whip really. So to begin with, the thing that I've spent the most time working on this month is a Santa cardigan. So what happened is that my brother-in-law is having a big milestone birthday this year, and I told him that I would make him a knitted item of his choice, and he told me he wanted a Christmas cardigan. And I didn't know if he meant that he wanted a nice wintry cabled cardigan or if he meant like a novelty, very Christmassy cardigan, and it turned out he meant the latter. So we went down a couple of rabbit holes, and his main design brief was that he wanted something that would delight his daughters and mortify his wife. And knowing my sister, I think what we've got is going to fit the bill nicely. So he decided he wanted a Santa shawl collared cardigan. So I have a surprising amount of it done for only working on this for about 5 weeks. So I started this at the beginning of November and it's now the second week of December. And you'll have to forgive me because it is in a strange state because I've just been knitting chunks of it in whatever order I felt like. So to begin with, this is BWM Luxury in 8-ply in both a colour called Love Heart and just the cream colour that I think it's literally just called cream. So those are the two yarns together. As you'll notice, this one has been wound into a cake because I discovered through a painful experience that you shouldn't center pull yarn from a BWM ball. It took a lot of untangling to get this back into a usable state. So be warned, if you're ever using yarn from Bendigo Woolen Mills, pull from the outside. And it is 8-ply yarn, but I'm knitting this on a 5mm needle because I did swatch on a 4mm, which is what I would normally knit 8-ply yarn on, but it came out a little tight. And also, since this is going to be a cardigan for Christmas, it's going to be very hot here in the summer. So I figured that if I went up 2 needle sizes and did it on a 5mm needle, then the fabric would be a bit more loose and it would be a little more airy for him. Plus it would just knit up faster, which I'm under a bit of time pressure, so that was also a plus. So I'm getting 19 stitches to 19 stitches to 10 centimeters, which is closer to what you'd normally knit 10-ply yarn on, but it's working out nicely for what I need it to be. So I'm self-drafting this pattern. I'm just making it up basically as I go along. So I took measurements initially from a jumper that my brother-in-law lent me. So this is the cardigan he lent me, and it was a pretty good example of what he wanted actually, because it's in the same construction, more or less, as the cardigan I wanted to make. And so initially I took some measurements off of here, and I also took some measurements from him, like I measured parts of his body. And I'm glad that I did both, because what I hadn't really realized was that the cardigan is actually knit in some sort of either brioche or fisherman's rib, so it's actually very, very stretchy. So when I initially measured it, the measurements came out quite a bit smaller than I needed them to be, because I didn't know how much to stretch the cardigan by. So I'm glad I had body measurements and garment measurements, because then I could sanity check them against each other. The other place that I got some measurements from is a pattern called Neighborly or Neighbor. I'll put the details up here on screen. And it's also for a cardigan that's knit on the same gauge as I'm getting, and it's the same construction as I wanted to make, which is just a set-in sleeved cardigan. And their stitch patterns are a little bit different, but their schematic has all of the measurements that you need on the different parts of the body in the cardigan, so I could use those also to sanity check my measurements that I was making up as I went. So the cardigan's a fairly standard bottom-up set-in sleeve cardigan. It's just stockinette all through the body, and then the bottom trim is garter stitch, and the collar is all in ribbing. And I was originally going to talk about how to draft a pattern, but it was just taking too long, and the way that I was explaining it wasn't great. So I think it would need a dedicated video. So if you're curious about how to draft a pattern for yourself, not necessarily write a full pattern with grading, but if you're just curious about how to make up your own patterns that are custom to you, then I can make a video about that and just have a standalone one that you can use more as a tutorial. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below, and I'll make that video soon, because I have a few other projects coming up that similarly fit the bill, where it's just a one-off pattern for one project that is sized to a particular person's body. So the reason this is in a bit of a shambles at the moment and is hard to show you is because what I'm doing with this is that I'm working out the pattern instructions for myself for one section, and then making that section, and then figuring out the instructions for the next section and doing it, so on and so forth. But there are points where I have to pause for quite a while because a piece is blocking. So when something is just drying, I'm just rolling on to the next bit, regardless of where I'm really up to. And so it's all in a bit of a shambles right now. So I started with the backs and the fronts because they were the easiest bits to start with, and that's what you needed as a base. And when they were all blocked and dried, I seamed them together at the shoulders. So that's the state that this side of the cardigan is currently in. As you can see, the side seam isn't there, and there's just a shoulder seam up here in the top. Then I started on the sleeves. So for the sleeves, this is only the second time I've designed a set-in sleeve, but I just wanted to do it more as an intellectual exercise because I just wanted to double check that I did know what I was doing with set-in sleeves. And so I figured out all of the maths, and I wanted to knit the sleeve top down because I'm not 100% sure on the sleeve length. So if he does want me to change the length of the sleeve, it needed to be top down so that I could undo it from the bottom of the wrist and just undo up to here, for example, and then add or subtract length depending on what he needed. So I started off by making the sleeve cap top down. So if you haven't seen a set-in sleeve before, they have this sleeve cap thing at the top, which is a section that you knit flat, and it basically looks like a bell curve. And when I tried that, it just wasn't working, and I couldn't really figure out what was going on because I triple and quadruple checked my maths, and it really should have worked out. And I think the problem is that when you knit them top down, you're doing a set of increases along this edge to make the sleeve cap get bigger and bigger. And it turns out that if you stack increases on top of each other, which I was having to do, and you have increases on subsequent rows, it makes the edge really, really tight. And so it was going to be too tight to actually fit comfortably into the armhole. So I frogged it all back and I did something that I would never actually write into a pattern. I actually cast on here in the middle. And unfortunately, I think my provisional cast on wasn't great because you can sort of see where it was. It's this sort of line of stitches right here that's a bit of a different row gauge than everything else. But hopefully that'll block out and it won't be as obvious. So I did a provisional cast on right here and I worked the sleeve cap up until it was done. And then I checked against the I checked against the armhole just to double check that it seemed like it would fit properly in there. And that was all good. So at that point, because I'd done a provisional cast on, I still had live stitches sitting at the bottom here. So I could work my way down. So just to triple check what I was doing, I actually cast on the second sleeve after that and did the sleeve cap too. So by that point, I had 2 sleeve caps that needed sleeves attached to them. So I started working my way down towards the wrist and doing some decreases to the wrist. But partway through, what I did actually was join in the round for a couple of reasons. I was getting sick of knitting stockinette flat by this point. Because it's been so much knitting. This is a cardigan for a man who's probably, how tall would he be? Maybe 6'2"? I'd have to ask him. So it's a very large cardigan and it's a lot of knitting. So I was getting pretty sick of knitting stockinette flat and I just wanted to knit round and round in circles. So I joined in the round. And what I did when I did join in the round is I actually kept this channel running down the middle here at the join. So when you seam pieces together, you actually have to add 1 stitch to each edge. That is what's called a seam allowance. If you're a sewer, you know what I mean, but if you're not, basically it's a stitch that gets eaten up by the seam. So it doesn't actually become part of the fabric. It sits on the inside as the seam. And so I wanted to keep that extra selvage edge, or those extra 2 stitches running down the middle, so that when I go to actually seam this together, because there is still a bit at the top that needs a seam, I'll just work my crochet hook, because I crochet seam everything. So essentially I fold it in half like this, and then I'll crochet down this bit to crochet them together and actually make the seam. But then I'll just keep doing that crochet line all the way down here and pretend like this needs to be seamed together. And that way it will still look the same all the way down the sleeve. So I have actually done it on the other sleeve, so I can show you what it looks like when it's done. So if you look at this seam here, you can't actually tell where I went from working flat to working in the round because it just all looks the same all the way down. So if you ever want to convert a seamless pattern into something in the round, then make sure, if you aren't planning on doing a fake seam, that you take 2 stitches out of the middle of where your sleeve joins together in the round, or keep the stitches in the middle and then do a fake seam all the way down. And the reason that you'd want to do a fake seam is actually the reason why I'm doing a seamed piece at all. So when you knit a cardigan, you do actually have the option of working the back and then the front separately to the armholes, and then working the body as just one long piece. So from the center or across the back and then back up to the other side of the front. But I really wanted to have seams in this cardigan because, like I mentioned, it's really big. I haven't weighed this yet, but I suspect it's going to end up weighing somewhere in the sort of 700 gram range. And given that, and the fact that the gauge is quite loose, it had the potential for stretching really badly. So I wanted to make sure I put seams in so that it wouldn't stretch as much and had a bit more structure. So as soon as the first sleeve was blocked, I seamed it in just to satisfy my brain that it was actually going to work. And it worked nicely. I think this sleeve looks pretty good. It looks like a sleeve, so that's good. And then I worked the second sleeve, which is this piece that I was showing you earlier. And I haven't blocked this yet. I was actually waiting for today because it's meant to be very hot and sunny today. So as soon as I'm done filming, I'm going to block this and let it dry. But since I had to wait for a bit, I just went ahead and started on the shawl collar. So if I had been sensible and looked ahead a little bit at how I was going to do this shawl collar, I would have actually seamed this sleeve in to this side so that I could have just had one side done and have it all finished and then worked on the other side. But the reason that I'm working this side of the collar specifically first is because on men's cardigans, the buttons are on this side, on the right side, and the holes are on the left side. And I haven't actually decided what buttons I'm using yet, so I don't know how many I'm going to have and how big they're going to be. So I didn't want to do the buttonhole side until I had the button side and I could put the buttons onto the button band just to get a visual for what the buttons would look like. So my options for buttons are either these little ones that I have in my stash, and I have enough of these, but I think they're too small. This is why I wanted to do the button band first so I could compare and see what they look like. It's a bit ridiculous looking, right? That's just way too small. But I don't really have time before Christmas to buy new buttons. So the other option that I actually have is that I made these cushion covers a couple of years back, and they have these nice big black buttons that are just plain black and they don't have the funny little stitch detailing along the edges. And they're much bigger. So I have 5 of these, and I might just take them off and sew them onto the cardigan and then find new buttons to put on the cushion covers at another time, because it's not really essential that it has buttons on it while they're just sitting on my couch. So that's the cardigan. It's going. I'm pretty happy with how it's going, and hopefully I will have this done just before Christmas. And it's looking like it'll be okay, actually. Given the pace that I'm going at, I think we'll get it done possibly by the end of this week, which will be sort of like the 12th, 13th of December, and he can start wearing it for the Christmas season. And then he can just have an early Christmas present. So the other whip that I have going, I haven't worked on a whole lot. This is a cushion cover that I'm making for my sister. She is also having a milestone birthday this year, and she asked me to make her some couch cushions. So these are European size cushions is what she called them. A standard couch cushion is 50 by 50 centimeters, and this is 65 by 65. So it's very large, and she's asked me for 2. If you've watched the last month or so's episodes of the podcast, I have actually finished one of these already. So I'll put a picture up here to show you what it looks like done. And this is the second one. I have just been doing this in between times when I really have had to pause on the Santa Cardi. That's my main project, and I really want to get it done in time for Christmas. She already has one of these finished, so I'm not prioritizing it as highly as some other projects that I want to get done. But I'm just chipping away on it when I've got some downtime and there's nothing else to work on. So the last time I showed you this, I think I just had this bottom half, so the pink and the orange squares done. And then I was partway through the bottom of the back. So the back's done in 2 separate sections because it's an envelope pillow, and then you seam it all together at the end. So this is the bottom half of the back. It's just plain garter stitch on the bias. And then since I last spoke to you about this, I've added the pink square to the top. And the last square at the top will be green. I think I have it here. It's this nice foresty green color. So the pattern is based on the, oh, I should know this, Stella quilt blanket. by Laura Penrose, and it is a blanket, but it gives you the instructions for how to make squares that are cut in half on the diagonal. So instead of making the full blanket and making 4 quilt blocks, I just put 4 of the squares together and scaled them up a little bit so that they were nice and big. So the green color, as well as this pink and the orange, are all Morris and Sons Estate 8-ply. And then the pink down the bottom here is from Stash, and it's Bendigo Wool & Mill's Luxury in 8-ply. And then the cream color is Bendigo Wool & Mill's Classic in 8-ply, and that color is called Straw. So a funny thing that happened when I was making this is that I finished the bottom half of the front, and you essentially bind off at that point. And then I made the bottom half of the back and then bound that off. And then I don't know why, but I decided to clean up my project bag. So I put the needles away, and I didn't write down what size needles that I was working with, which just classic fail. I do this often enough that every time I make a Ravelry project, I'm like, okay, first thing I need to do, write down the needle size, because otherwise I will forget what needles I was using at a point where I really need to know. And I just hadn't written down the needle size anywhere. So I looked up the needle size for my old blanket. So I have made a blanket based on this pattern, and I was using 4.5mm needles for that. So I started out, when I started out knitting this square at the top, that was the point at which I'd forgotten the needle size. So I started out with a 4.5mm needle, but I still wasn't entirely convinced. So I went through all of the footage that I'd taken for all of the vlogs making this pillow, and there was nothing where I had mentioned needle size. And the best that I could find was this picture. So this is a still from one of my videos. And luckily the picture resolution was high enough that when I blew this up on my screen, I could actually see some of the markings that are on the Chalgu needles. But because it had stitches on it, I couldn't really see it very clearly. So I stared and stared and stared and stared at this photo, and I made it bigger and bigger and bigger and zoomed in more and more on my screen. And I finally convinced myself that I was actually using 4mm needles, not 4.5mm ones. So part of the way through this triangle, probably somewhere around here, I switched to the 4mm needles, and after looking at it now, you wouldn't be able to see it on screen, but in real life it's actually obvious enough that I made the right decision, thankfully, because the stitches in the top part of this triangle look much more similar to the ones down here than this little section down here. They look quite a bit looser. So all that to say, PSA, write your needle size down, because you never know when you're going to go through a fit of tidiness and clean up your project bag. So that's ticking along nicely. It'll get done when it's done, but I'm not in too much of a rush for it to be finished. I haven't even given her the other pillow yet because they're waiting until their couch is delivered because they got a new couch. And then when that comes, they would like the cushion. So I'll give it to her then. And the second one may or may not be finished by that point. So the only other thing that I made this month is this swatch here. So this is knit in Morris & Sons Avalon in 4-ply. And this is a swatch for a 4-ply version of my top called Lorraine's Lace. So Lorraine's Lace is my most popular pattern by far. It is a lace back top. So from the front, it just looks like a regular tank top, but in the back, it's got this lovely lacy triangle detail. And I designed this back in 2017. And it was knit for a 10-ply yarn. And I've discovered in all my years of knitting that I actually run quite cold. So I'm pretty comfortable wearing 10-ply cotton on a very hot day, which is why I used it to make a sleeveless top. But I've had a lot of feedback from friends who have made the top that it's a bit of a weird in-between thing for most people because the yarn is too heavy for them to wear in the summer, but the fact that it's sleeveless means that they can't wear it in the autumn. And if you wear a jacket over the top, it covers up the lace, which is the nicest part of the top. So I figured I'd go ahead and make it in a 4-ply yarn. So I have made my swatch. So my only dilemma with this right now is that I think I've missed the boat for releasing this for an Aussie summer. So it's currently the middle-ish of December, and as you can see, I've got a lot to do still in a very short period of time. So I think the earliest I could possibly release this would be in March or April, which would be perfect for my Northern Hemisphere knitters, because that would be right around the time when I think people start planning their summer knits. But I do really want to favour my Southern Hemisphere and Australian knitters, especially because this is made out of an Australian yarn. I'm an Australian designer. It'd be nice for it to be geared more towards the Aussies. So if you are in Australia, could you please leave some feedback down below for if it would be a silly thing for me to release this in March or April? Are you already over summer? You're like gearing up for cozy winter jumpers. If that is the case, let me know when you do gear up for summer knitting. If it's more in the like September, October region, or if it's like closer to November, December, because I can hold off on releasing this until the end of next year. So that's all I've been working on. In terms of a stash update, because I have no FOs, my stash total hasn't changed from last month because I only count yarn as being out of my stash once I've finished a project, not while it's in progress. The one exception I have is that there's one tiny FO I have to show you. This is a hair bow, and it's my daughter's first knitting project. So I'm so proud of her. She is 7, almost 7, and I had tried to teach her how to knit maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. Of course, she's seen me knitting her whole life, so she's been after me to teach her for ages. But my problem was that I was pretty insistent to myself that I wanted to teach her how to knit continental. Just because I switched from English knitting to continental knitting maybe about 15 years ago, and I'm so glad that I did. It just seems so much better to me in so many ways. And especially because she is also interested in crochet, and the way that you hold your yarn when you're knitting continental is the same as it is when you crochet. So I figure that if I teach her how to knit continental, it'll be easier to teach her how to crochet down the line. So the way that I did end up teaching her finally is that I held the yarn for her for the first hour or two of her knitting, because I've realized, especially for people with smaller hands, the hardest part of knitting continental is managing to hold the needle and the yarn in your left hand all together. So I just held the yarn for her, and I taught her the motion for how to actually scoop the yarn through the loops. And I think, it took probably less than 2 hours. She just sort of had it going. And then at that point, I tried to teach her a couple of different ways to hold the yarn, but she insisted that she'd figure it out for herself. So I just left her to it, and she did. She's competent enough with her fine motor skills at this point, she's almost 7, that she had a sense of what she needed to do the best. And it was great that she figured it out for herself, because the way she holds the yarn is not a way that I would have taught her at all. But it works for her, and she made a whole hair bow. So this top part here was yarn that wasn't from stash, and it was really lucky that it's what she picked. So she pulled this out of her really, really scrappy bin. So since she was a toddler, she's had a yarn bin that's just my random odds and ends that she's allowed to play with. So she pulled this out of that bin, and it was, I don't even remember what this yarn is, but it was so sticky that when she was unraveling the yarn to knit with it, it had actually stuck together to itself in the ball. But that was actually a bonus at the end of the day, because it meant that if she ever dropped a stitch as she was learning, it didn't run down the knitting. Basically, if she pulled her needle out by accident of all the stitches, if she dropped a single stitch, any mistake she made, the yarn just stayed in place. So that was actually really, really good for someone who was learning. So that's a bit of a tip if you're trying to teach someone. Get them really sticky sort of felty yarn, because it worked out really well for her. And then for the bottom part here, she picked out this bright blue yarn, which is the same as this green one actually. So it's also Estate 8 ply from Morris & Sons. And she was insistent that her bow would have little pointy bits at the bottom. So I actually did the pointy bits for her because I didn't want to have to teach her how to increase or decrease in her first project. So I did the points, and then she just knit a rectangle through the middle. And so if you're ever looking to make a hair bow, it's really easy. All you do is knit a bit of a fat squat rectangle and then a long skinny rectangle, and you tie the skinny rectangle around the middle of the fat rectangle, and that brings it in to make the bow shape, and then you've got the little ties at the end. Realistically, we could have made this longer so that you could actually see the little bits a little bit better, but she's pretty happy with it. She wanted to move on, so it's great. So she used 8 meters of yarn out of my stash for this dark blue bit. So my current stash total is 40,883 meters. So I'm still pretty up there. I think between the cardigan and the pillowcase, I don't even know how to estimate. It should be a couple of thousand meters at least. So I'm hoping that next time I talk to you, that number will be quite a bit further down. So the next section of my podcast is Off the Needles, where I talk about things that aren't whips or FOs, sometimes knitting related, sometimes not. This time it's definitely knitting related. So I wanted to let you know that I am releasing a pattern with Morris & Sons. So for a bit of background, I've been shopping at Morris & Sons since I was, 12 or 13. Back then they were called Tapestry Craft, and they had a very, very big needlework section. And when I was a teenager, I was very into cross stitch. So I did a lot of shopping at Morris & Sons back when they were Tapestry Craft, and they had always had a yarn section. And my mum had taught me how to knit when I was a little kid. I took a bit of a break while I was doing a lot of cross stitching, and then I got back into knitting in my late teens, sort of early 20s. And so because I was already going to the shop a lot, it was pretty natural to switch over and start shopping in the yarn section. So I have a lot of good memories there. I bought my first skein of fancy yarn from Morris & Sons. It's the first place my husband went to buy me a present when we were dating. And so I was just really excited to get the opportunity to actually work with them now. So the first thing we're doing together is releasing a new version of Homecoming Honeycombs. So Homecoming Honeycombs is a 8-ply beanie that's knit in a mosaic knit pattern. Technically it's slip stitch knitting, not really mosaic. If you don't know what that is, I will leave a link to a tutorial for it up here in the corner, but it's essentially a way of doing color work that means that you only hold one strand at a time. So it looks like color work, but it doesn't require you to hold 2 strands of yarn through one row. So I released this a couple of years ago now, probably in 2021 or 2022, and it was actually knit from a Morris & Sons yarn, but they've since discontinued that yarn. So I'm re-releasing it into 2 different styles. So I don't have the samples with me anymore because they're going to be on display in the shop, which I'm very excited about, but I do have the yarn, so I can show you that. So the mohair version is a strand of Rowan Kid Silk Haze held together with a strand of Empire 4-ply. And I like these together because the variegated colors are very, very bright, and I wanted to tone it down a little bit. So I held it together with a dark blue strand of the mohair, and that turned out quite nicely. I'll put pictures up on the screen if I haven't already. And then the contrast color is Morris & Sons Estate in 8-ply, just in this light grey. For the solid colored version, I'm pretty happy doing a solid colored version because until now, every Homecoming Honeycombs beanie I've made, and I've made a lot of them, has had a variegated or rainbow gradient for the main color, which has meant that I've always used a very neutral sort of contrast color. But because the solid version is just 2 plain colors, then I could go a little bit more interesting, bright, with the contrast color. So again, this is Morris & Sons Empire in 8-ply this time, just held by itself. And then this is Morris & Sons Estate in 8-ply. And when you put them together, the swatch ended up looking very mermaidy, which my daughter was delighted by. She really wanted to keep the beanie, but she has like 3 of these beanies already. So I put my foot down and told her, no, sorry, the sample is for the shop. But if she ever grows out of her current beanies, I know what colors to make it in for her. So the pattern is actually going to be released on their website tomorrow, my time. But in your time, when you're watching this, it will already have been released. I'm also really excited that they're releasing kits. So I think they told me they're releasing 3 different colors sets for each version. So I'm assuming that they're going to do these 2 kits as one of them, but I have no idea what the rest of the color combinations are, so I'm really excited to see what they've come up with. And I will put pictures of them up here on the screen because by the time I'm editing this, they'll have released them already. And I'll put a link down into the description below where you can either buy the pattern by itself or the kits. So also, I think it would make a nice option as a Christmas present if you have someone who lives overseas in a colder climate, or if you just have someone who likes to knit and they can hold on to it until it's winter here in Australia. Oh, and if you are looking for Christmas gifts, I did a whole gift guide video and I'll put a link to that up here in the corner. The video is sort of geared more towards non-knitters because I figured that you could send the video to your friends if you want to give them hints about what they should be buying you for Christmas. But there's also options for different types of notions. And so if you're curious to see that and you're looking for ideas for yourself as well for what to ask people for Christmas or just to treat yourself to, then you can go check that video out too. Okay, the last section of the podcast is up next, where I just talk about what's going to come up in the next couple of months or so. So after I'm done with the cardigan, there's a Christmas crochet that I wanted to do for a really long time. For the last couple of years, I wanted giant crochet earrings and I just haven't had a chance to make them. I'm always busy around now. So I am going to finally make them. This year, I'm going to do it. Hold me to it. So I have a pattern and stuff picked out, but I will show you that whenever I get it going. The other thing I need to make is that if you've been wondering why I think the Santa cardigan is mortifying enough for my sister, it's because the other thing that my brother-in-law wants is actually a string of crocheted or knitted Christmas lights running basically from wrist to wrist, up the sleeves and across the back and then down towards the other sleeve. So once I'm done with the cardigan and the earrings, I'm going to crochet these lights. I have a pattern picked out. It is actually crochet, and I think it's the first time I've ever intentionally chosen to crochet over knitting. Every time I've crocheted before now, it's because I didn't have another choice. The pattern was in crochet, but I've actually found options for both a crochet and a knit version of these lights, and I've gone with the crochet, or at least I'm intending to. I haven't started it yet. So that's an interesting development in my crafting life, but I'll talk more about why I decided to do that whenever I talk about the actual lights themselves. So my family and I are heading over to America for Christmas to go see some family. So my plan for the next couple of months is to probably only get one more video out. So I would like to do an everything that I've knit video for 2025. So I'll probably try and film that before we leave in a couple of weeks, and then I'll edit and release it while I'm in the States. So I hope that I manage to get that done before we leave, but if I don't, I will publish that at the end of January. So if I don't get to see you before Christmas, then I hope you have a wonderful holiday season that's filled with whatever wonderful things you want it to be filled with. If Christmas is a tough time for you, because I know it is for some people, I hope that you're looking after yourself, maybe with some knitting, maybe not. But either way, be kind to yourself. And I will see you either just before Christmas or at the end of January. So if you've enjoyed this video, I would appreciate a thumbs up or a like down below, because that does help other people find the channel and the video. And if you would like to see the Everything I've Knit video coming up and make sure you get a notification for it, then you can hit the subscribe button either right here or down below, and also hit the bell button that's next to the subscribe. If you'd like to catch up with previous videos or podcast episodes, there's a whole playlist of them right here. But until I see you again, happy holidays and happy knitting, and I'll see you next time.